Hello, it's me again. And I think they made a few mistakes with the DK class going into 10.1, and it's a total shame too, because I think it was completely avoidable. Not through an entire spec rework like what Red got, but really just the design philosophy of 10.1 and the sweeping changes they made perfectly attacked DK's problems if they were handled appropriately in 10.1, which they were not. And I actually said what I assumed they were going to do on every medium that I knew about, social medias and videos and Discords and other places that I had to provide feedback. And apparently I was just screaming into the void. And I do not have the keys to their building to walk in there and open up and start typing away, coding on a keyboard, right? And nor would I know how, because I don't know how to do that. But so I'm kind of powerless here, believe it or not. But it is weird to have said everything that should have happened and I assumed was going to happen, and then none of it happened, and now we have the exact problem that I said might happen if none of those things were done, but I assumed they were going to do those things. So that sounds a little vague, right? You're like, what are you talking about? Come on, dude. Nerd boy, get to the point, right? And that will come. But I have to do the entire video to explain it because it's a lot of stuff that just was not implemented. So by the end of this video, you will understand how 10.1 could have addressed every single one of our problems with beautiful, elegant solutions of customization and balance and fun to play-ness. It could have been all added to both the specs, Unholy and Frost, just from the strict design philosophy added by 10.1. And by the end of the video, you will probably be exactly as livid about it as I am. But I have to spend this entire video talking about it because it is difficult to explain quickly. So now I'm going to do that. So first, what we have to do is understand what the design philosophy of 10.1 is, what I even mean by that. So first of all, for 10.1, they released a bunch of PvE stuff. That doesn't matter. A bunch of class changes. That does matter, but they are not sweeping PvP changes. They are just class changes to each class. And then they added two sweeping changes to PvP as a whole. One, the crit damage and healing modifier, going from 175 to 150%. That's actually awesome, by the way, because that attacks the slingshottiness, the 100 to 0 to 100 to 0 effect of PvP right now, which nobody really likes. It is stressful and unfun and gimmicky. It leads to a lot of gimmicks, like when you run in there and you pop everything, you one-shot somebody, and then you just run away and you wait for your ability to do that again, right? The game is a little bit more fun when it's more fluid, right? Legion had the 150% crit damage and healing modifiers, and I think people looked back on Legion very fondly. The game is more fluid. There's more time to trade. There's more time to do multiple setups rather than just one colossal setup, right? There's more time to do sustained pressure and constantly be playing the game and constantly adapting and learning to what your teammates and opponents are doing and making the game play out more like that, like a dance rather than, I don't know, a gunshot. It was very fun, all right? And this change actually addresses that in a big way because it lowers the high end of damage and lowers the high end of healing, making instead of people go from 0 to 100 to 0, they spend more time around the middle, which also subsequently helps healers want to play the game, because one of the things that healers don't want to do, I'm sure, is have everybody on their team die in one global, and then they get yelled at for being a loser and an idiot and terrible, right? My fault. Yeah, so no, I also played a lot of healer in Solo Shuffle. Yeah, it was brutal. Okay, but anyway, yeah, so that change attacks that. Actually, it does a great job attacking that. So we're off to a good start. Let's keep going. The other change is the PvP talent rework, which came to pretty much every class and spec where they wanted to take these little things, right? These guys, and remove some, add some, bake some into your toolkit, modify some, take some that are like staples and kind of just like add their effects to other abilities. They did this with Enhancement Shaman, gave an Ellie Shaman, the Flame Shock Dispel thing was just baked into their kit. That does not make either spec overpowered. That's not what I'm saying. It's just like a cool quality of life thing where you get something that maybe should be a part of your kit, right? And then you can use different PvP talents, right? So that's pretty cool. And that was the other change that they made. So crit damage and healing, 10.1 PvP talent rework. That's the big design philosophy for a PvP standpoint that came with 10.1. Okay, now I'm going to go into both, starting with Unholy, then going into Frost, and there'll be timestamps for both. I'm going to go into those specs in detail and explain how those two things could have completely changed all of the things that I said about the class. Like, it could have been more fun, more customizable, better spot in the meta, better balance, less gimmicky, if they had just directed that attention on DK as well as other classes, but they did not. And yeah, so here we go. Starting with Unholy. Okay, so Unholy, PvP talent rework, right? PvP talent rework came in, and how did that lack of effect on Unholy, how could it have affected Unholy? Well, one of the things that I said was that they baked in some core PvP talents into the actual toolkit, right? So you could have more experimentation, because your toolkit in PvP should not be based around PvP talents. They should be based around your just inherent stuff. And then the PvP talents should be to customize for niches, for certain situations, for certain synergies you want to build, right? Okay. Well, here's one that might have been able to do that. It's this guy right here. Raise Abomination is now a PvE talent called Army of the Dead that cannot be used in PvP, then replaced by a PvP talent, which now enables your 4-set. Your 4-set says it right there, Raise Abomination, right? You cannot get the the Army of the Dead version of this 4-set because you cannot use that in PvP. So you have to take a PvE talent, which does nothing, then convert it to a PvP talent simply to access your 4-set. If that wasn't a good spot for a baseline baked into your kit, I don't know what is. I mean, that absolutely should have gotten that treatment. It's already bad enough that new players see this and they click it and they said, that sounds great. And then they just press it in PvP and it does nothing. And they're like, oh, where does it say anywhere on here that I had to also grab a PvP talent for this to even work? So it was bad enough that it's just stupid, right? But now that they add the 4-set functionality and they do a PvP talent rework and they still don't address this is mind-boggling. And by the way, Raise Abomination does not do that much damage. The wound pressure is nice and the disease application is nice and it's all utility-based stuff. And Unholy at the end of last season was not good. Every Unholy lost 800 points if they played at the end of last season. So giving them something like this in tandem with the PvP talent rework would have made plenty of sense, because it's just a small little buff in a PvP environment only. And in PvE, it's really good right now, or at least with some trinket that I don't care about, but it's completely separate because this is only PvP talent. If they make it so when you go into PvP, you get this. It only affects PvP, which is where it needs the help, because at the end of last season, it was bad in PvP. They did not do that. Locked in PvP talent, because you have to do it for both this talent to work and for your 4-set, which people are going to play. Now you have Necrotic Wounds. Necrotic Wounds, another problem child, because our class, their spec is balanced around having this. You saw it with the changes that they made over last season, where they nerfed our rot pressure and nerfed our diseases and even nerfed this, because they're balancing Unholy based around having this in the first place, which, by the way, ended up being ridiculous to nerf diseases, which I told them was going to be a problem, because diseases have to be oppressive. They have to be too much damage because they are just chips. They're just a lot of hits over a long period of time, right? That is what they are. They're not a one-shot. They're not Templar's Verdict. They're not Chaos Bolt. They're not Star Surge, right? Well, Star Surge doesn't hit that hard, but Boomies do a lot of shit right now. We're not going to talk about Boomies. They make me so mad, but right, they're not, you know, Final Reckoning, whatever. They're not that stuff. They are just small hits like Aflock, small hits built over a long period of time. But eventually they become oppressive when you can have enough damage, overall damage. But if you bring them down to a fair amount of damage, then they're just passively healed through. By HOTS, which was compounded on by the fact that we lost Blight because of PvE, and then it was compounded on further by the fact that everybody is more tanky as a whole right now with the stamina, meaning those little tiny chip hits that bring them down over a long period of time has more health to go through and is thus less impactful than people just doing unlimited damage and CCing the healer, right? So not only did all of that, I mean, they didn't listen to me at all. I warned them. I remember being on stream saying, hey, I know everybody's going to say Unholy is at the top of the meters, diseases are so broken, but they need to be at the top of the meters for diseases to do anything, because otherwise they're the least effective pad in the game, and the disease build has never been good, so now it's been good for 3/4 of one season in 7 years. Congratulations. But it also means our toolkit, as they've proved, is kind of balanced around having Necrotic Wounds. This is our Mortal Strike. It's a stackable Mortal Strike, and it is effectively our additional pressure, right? Our pressure now in PvP is coming from having this. which means you have to have it, right? You cannot take out the thing that they're balancing around and then assume your spec will be as powerful, right? So there's another locked-in PvP talent, and then it gets even worse because we have this new thing, and it's really cool. It's fun. It's a little gimmicky, but it's also not. Unlike just a one-shot, it's kind of more sustained because it's 2 charges with a short cooldown, and all you have to do is just keep them in. You can grip blind, you can grip again, you can A-bomb limb, pull everybody in, then war stomp, then double chains, then they get hit by one. It's a lot of disruption, it's a lot of damage. It is pretty impactful, but there's a problem with this because our other 2 PvP talents are locked in, like I just proved. If this one is now a big portion of our damage and our toolkit's pressure, overall damage done, and disruption, then this one is also locked in, which means all of Unholy's power comes from its PvP talents, which does 2 things wrong. It, 1, makes our PvP talents not customizable, which is a real shame after they just did an entire PvP talent rework, but it also means our entire baseline talents are not good. Because if 30% of our output and effectiveness comes from PvP talents, then the rest of our kit is only 70% value, which means every single one of these synergies, the disease build, the pet build, the clawing build, they're all not very impactful in a PvP environment, and that is absolutely true. Press Clawing Shadows and tell me how hard it hits. You're welcome, right? This is the problem, right? We are now a spec balanced exactly around PvP talents, which they just aggressively tried to remove from the game. So now, again, not only do all of this customization not matter as much as it could have, but none of your PvP talents are customizable. Spell Warden, new thing added to the game. Can't ever click it. How are you going to click it? What am I going to do? This? You're not going to do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do this. You can't do this. Well, you never do that. You can't do this. You can't do this. String, really cool, but can't do it, right? You cannot do it. And that's ridiculous, right? So how is this fixable? And I thought they were going to do this, and I talked about it a million. I even said, helpful reminder, make sure you make raise A-bomb baseline now that it actually affects our tier set, and then it'll open up your PvP talents during a PvP talent rework, blah, blah, blah. Make raise A-bomb. Army of the Dead, switch to raise A-bomb in PvP. That gets rid of this one. Bake necrotic wounds into the toolkit. Fine. Unholy's not that great right now. Other specs like Arms Warrior, press Mortal Strike, get Mortal Strike. DH is in their PvE talents. BM Hunter, it's on their pets. Demo Lock, it's on their pets. Just bake this into the class. You are literally balancing around it. You nerf and buff based on us having necrotic wounds. So if you want us to have necrotic wounds that bad, just put it in the toolkit. Again, Unholy buffs are not a problem because it's not that oppressive right now. So giving it its core mechanics as a baseline mechanic, then raise A-bomb and necrotic wounds. Those are gone. You can keep reanimation. Maybe bring this down to 10% of their health and then buff these abilities accordingly. You've always had PvP modifiers. You've never been afraid to use them. So Clawing Shadows PvP modifier, Death Coil PvP modifier, and return the Virulent Plague PvP modifier, as well as removing the half duration that Virulent Plague has right now in the game, strictly because it was used to stop drinks in BFA Season 3 with Epidemic setting up healers when it was 30-second duration. How is that in the game? It's been 6 years, Blizzard. We still have a half duration. If you press Virulent Plague in PvP with Eben Fever, it lasted like 6 seconds. There's no reason that should ever be. It's supposed to be rot pressure, not a quick burst of diseases, right? Buff Virulent Plague back in PvP. Remove the Virulent Plague 50% duration modifier that's used to stop drinks in expansion. That's 2 expansions detached. And baseline, raise A-bomb, necrotic wounds. And I said absolutely all of these things, and none of them were done. They did a PvP talent rework, but they did not address Unholy. They did PvP modifiers, but they did not address Unholy. They baked things into baseline specs kits, but they did not address Unholy, so now our talents don't matter, our disease build is whack, and our PvP talents are not usable. Incredible that all of that happened. Incredible, right? But it gets worse. Because if they were to even do that, the PvP talents that they didn't rework or did rework both have all their own hosts of problems. So let's say they fix necrotic wounds and they fix raise A-bomb and just bake it into our kit. So now we have 2 free PvP talents to work with, like every other class. So we should really have that, right? Now you can run String. That's actually awesome. String is really cool. Doom Burst would be a really nice choice because of all the Death Coil buffs that they've been doing and the Death Coil proc buffs that they've been doing. But this actually is still bugged. It does not apply 2 stacks of wounds to Festermite, which It's effectively just having the value of bursting wounds, because Fester Might and Doom Burst energy would be really high if it existed, but it doesn't, because it only gives you 1 stack of Fester Might, even though it's bursting 2 wounds. And I know that this isn't an instance base, like, well, Fester Might only gets stacks when you do an instance of bursting wound. Like if you press APOC, you would be bursting wounds, not bursting 4 wounds, so you would only get 1 stack. That's not how it works. You get 4 stacks for using APOC, so you should get 2 stacks from Doom Burst, and you don't. So that's just bugs. Bloodforged armor is awesome, but we can never choose it. Rotten Wither still exists, and I told them how making D&D an aura and buffing its damage for Rotten Wither would be incredible. It would actually feel more like Rotting and Withering and have a ton of synergy with Defile, so that would improve the clunkiness of this talent that you forced us to choose, because you took Epidemic and Blight and you swapped them, so now we have to go down this line. So Defile, if we want to get Unholy Blight, that is. So we have to go Defile if in the next situation, and then you can make it more accessible to PvP talent, but they didn't do anything with this. Spell Warden is hilarious because it's effectively Sank effectiveness, right? You can prevent a stun trap or a DB poly, but it requires you to give up your defensive. Sank is just a PvP talent, and that's the fact of the matter, right? You use Sank by taking up a PvP talent slot. Spell Warden is taking up a PvP talent slot and using your defensive in order to get the same type of effect, preventing CC on your healer. But you know what the craziest bit is? AMS, in the situation of DB Poly, right? AMS would be extremely valuable at that comp, because that means it's probably a wizard cleave, right? So you are utilizing your defensive that would be very important in that matchup and a PvP talent to immune the CC on your healer. But that might actually just be a net neutral at the cost of a PvP talent. I mean, that's completely insane, right? Of course, it's very good if you're trying to get the CC on your healer and you're not being the kill target, but anybody with a brain can see that you just used AMS to do that and that you'd have 1 less PvP talent, and then they might go you, because guess what? Spell Warden is not in the game, because there it is. I'm looking at it. So we don't have passive wizard immunity. And Zone is a 2-minute cooldown, and AMS we just used to get the healer out of CC, so now we don't have it. Do you see where I'm getting with this? Right. We have a host. This does nothing. Dark Sim is a gimmick. Well, it's not a gimmick, it's too niche. Necrotic Aura would be cool, but we can't choose it. Necro Bargain hasn't been touched in years, and it's never going to be used. Raise A-Bomb should be baseline. Strangulate is really cool. Doom Burst doesn't work. Rotten Wither, I've told them how to fix this a million times. Bloodforged is really cool, and Spell Warden is just Sank but worse. Necrotic Wound should be baseline, and Reanimation should not be how our toolkit is based. They just did a PvP talent rework, but they did not address any of our problems. And I told them what every single one of them were. And that's the problem with Unholy. And what is crazy is now you are seeing how every single thing I just mentioned directly lies in the philosophy of 10.1. We could have, the crit damage and healing modifiers didn't affect us very much, so if they just increased our regular toolkit, we would have had tons of sustained pressure, which is more fitting into the 10.1 meta of more sustain rather than more chunk. And then the PvP talent rework would have addressed all those problems, like I said, 7 times, and now we're making that an 8th. So, none of that was done. Literally, none of it. None. And now we move on to Frost, which is exactly as angering, because it's exactly the same way. So, now we talk more about the 150% change. 150% change aggressively attacks the classes that crit more, right? This is Fisher-Price, baby's first level of critical thinking. Every class can crit, but some classes have crits more based around their class's output than others, like one that has Killing Machine, which gives you a guaranteed crit, right? So, of course, you know that Frost is more affected by these changes than other classes that don't have guaranteed crits baked into the way they do damage, right? That's actually okay. Because Frost being a gimmicky grip, blind, stun, one-shot, and then run the entire rest of the game is stupid. That is stupid. That's not how Frost should play every game all the time only, because it limits the comps they can play and limits the fun you can have, because all you do is one-shot and run, one-shot and run, one-shot and run. It's stupid. So taking this crit damage and healing modifier into consideration, that brings down our spikiness and really directly nerfs Frost, right? Frost DK as a whole. Which means if they know that's going to happen, they can perfectly readjust our damage profile by putting it into spenders like Frost Strike or Howling Blast Rhyme procs, which are a little bit, or Howling Blast base damage in PvP, which would then affect it multiplicatively with Rhyme procs, right? So you could then bake the damage into other parts of the toolkit, because right now it's just obliterate, 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 and nothing else, right? Your damage breakdown is obliterate at the top, and everything else doesn't matter, right? They're removing some of the obliterate damage from that crit damage modifier nerf, and they could put it into Frost Strike and Howling Blast, which would subsequently help the dual wield spec out a ton, which is great because that's how Frost plays to be more sustain oriented, which is how it played in Legion, which people remember very fondly. They had the opportunity to do that, and all they have to do is use PvP modifiers, which we know they have no fear of doing, and they did not do any. No Frost Strike, no Howling Blast. They kept Obliterate being nerfed. They kept the entire toolkit otherwise doing nothing. And Frost and the health pools went way up. So even the burst setup is still only useful if you play exactly Dragon DK, which shoehorns you into one gimmicky, terribly fun, unfun comp, right? And they completely could have addressed it because they were bringing everything down. All they had to do was attack Frost Strike, Remorseless Winter, and Howling Blast with PvP modifiers. They have the talents based around those. Here's Icebreaker for Rhyme proc. Here's Remorseless Winter talents. Here's a Frost Strike talent, right? They have synergies in the kit. They need to make the baseline of those abilities higher in PvP because the PvP environment does not let Frost stay in and do those things. Right? So they have to have the baseline of those abilities higher in PvP, and then maybe we can choose some of those talents to go all into and provide ourselves with a more sustained setup. All right? The other thing that they needed to do, now that Spell Warden is being removed from the game, like we already talked about, and that was one of our biggest magic shutdown, and Frost is getting a little less of the one shot, so maybe we could actually go back to being a sustained class, and Frost was already pretty much an overreaction nerfed before the expansion's first season even started, right? You could just give it back some of the survivability nerfs that you took away. One, AMS, you took that away because of Spell Warden, which now no longer exists, right? And then the Death Strike one was just ill-advised. It was only because Unholy was so tanky with Necrotic Wounds and Blood Plague, but Frost never had those things, so Frost was just attacked for no reason by a change that didn't need to be done and is still in the game, even though right now it would make even more sense to unnerf it. But that's just getting started, because then even Frost could have been addressed with the PvP talent changes. And we got one, Bloodforged, and that was actually a great change. But then everything else stayed the same. Bitter Chill has not been touched, still 8%. Dark Stem still niche. They updated the icon for Shroud of Winter just to like laugh at us. It still is never used in any situation. Death Chill still has the problem of being 3 globals for a root. Apply chains root, then reapply chains because the chains root removes chains. This is 3 globals for a root for a PvP talent. Unbelievable. And then Rotten Wither. This still exists. They just went through a PvP talent rework and this still exists in the game. Why is it here? Couldn't they have just removed it so I didn't have to look at it anymore? Guys, this is a talent for Frost Decay. Your Death and Decay rots enemies each time it deals damage. Okay. 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 This is a PvP talent. After the PvP talent rework, maybe they know something I don't. Maybe they know something I don't, guys. Maybe they're just the better Frost Decay player. Honestly, I'm pretty old, pretty washed. Maybe that's... Hold on now. Hold on now. Oh, right. I have a D&D macro. And I don't have double charge because I was trying dual wield. This was, by the way, the worst solo shuffle of my life. The worst solo shuffle of my entire life, trying dual wield in that solo shuffle. I died to a boomkin. It wasn't that one. It was one of these. I died to a boomkin. There's nothing I could do. Watch this. Let's see what I'm missing. That's over 4,000 damage for a PvP talent. That's insane. That is 1/8 of a Starfall tick, ticking every half second to everybody and every pet in the arena. Permanently. I have to look at this. It exists. How does this exist? Right. you guys see the problem? Frost Decay, gimmicky, one-shot oriented, miss the sustain, constant goes, stay in, juggernaut, tank, plate class. Not RMP, but melee version, right? Just stay in, do damage, quick goes. It has none of that. Its survivability was nerfed before the expansion even started and still not addressed. Our PvP talents don't do anything or are the most boring in the game. Abilities like Remorseless Winter have entire talent lines based around them, still do nothing. And half of our tree is a capstone that we cannot use in PvP because they refuse to unnerf it. The middle capstone leads us to a stun, which is an all-in-one-shot gimmick. And the left capstone would be awesome for an ice cap build that we can never play because they refuse to attract or address any of the sustained damage problems that Frost has had for 5 years. And all of those things could have been fixed with the design philosophy of 10.1. The crit damage modifiers open up the ability to move to a more sustained damage profile, and the PvP talent rework would have hit DK the hardest because DKs have the worst or most convoluted or most required PvP talents in the game. Are you as mad as I am now?